Officer Jay Baker knelt beside the two boys, watching as they devoured the food he'd handed them. Their clothes were torn, their faces smudged with dirt, but it was their eyes, wide with exhaustion and fear, that unsettled him the most. "Where are your parents?" he asked gently. The older of the two hesitated, then whispered the unthinkable. Baker's stomach twisted. His hand went straight to his radio as he stood up. "Dispatch, I need back now." Officer Baker stood silently for a minute, taking in the boys' desperate situation. Their mumbled words about living on the streets and no place to go echoed in his mind. He quickly realized he needed to do something for these poor boys. Each second felt too long as he planned what he needed to do next. He kept a reassuring tone and said, "Don't worry. We'll figure this out. Help is on the way." As the cold wind blew, Jay and Jake pulled their thin jackets tighter. Officer Baker could see them trembling and knew he had to get them somewhere warm. He picked up his radio and called for backup, his voice steady but urgent. "Have to get these boys safe," he thought. "Help is coming soon, guys," he assured them, noticing the small glimmer of hope in their eyes as he spoke. Reluctantly, the boys started to open up, speaking in hushed voices. Jay took a deep breath and said, "It started when Grandma told us to leave." Jake nodded in agreement, explaining how they'd searched for their mom and dad, only to find they were gone forever. Officer Baker listened carefully, his heart heavy with the weight of their words. He realized this wasn't just a simple issue, but something far more complex. With everything they revealed, Baker's concern for the boys grew. "You mean you've been alone this whole time?" he asked, trying to hide his shock. Jake nodded, tears threatening to fall. "We tried finding someone, but no one would help." The officer felt a surge of determination. He knew he had to do everything to get these boys the help they needed and find out why they were left alone. This wasn't just about finding someone to look after Jay and Jake. As he listened, Officer Baker sensed something more sinister at play. He did not have a solid argument to support this, but his gut feeling almost never failed him. It wasn't just a simple case of missing guardians. Looking at the boys shivering in the cold, he knew he had to dig deeper to uncover what had really happened to them and make sure they were safe. Backup arrived quickly, Officer Miller stepping out with a reassuring smile. "What's the situation, Baker?" he asked, noting the seriousness in Baker's eyes. "These boys need our help," Baker explained, motioning toward Jay and Jake. "All right, let's get them warmed up while we sort this," Miller said, showing his determination to help the boys feel safe again. Baker was very happy that Officer Miller immediately shared his concern. Officer Miller handed out some warm blankets to the shivering boys. "Here you go, these should help," he said, trying to offer comfort through his actions. Jay and Jake clutched the blankets tightly, their small hands grateful for the warmth. "Thank you," Jay whispered, looking up with tired eyes. Baker and Miller shared a glance, both feeling the urgency to get to the root of the boys' story and provide them the protection they desperately needed. As Officer Baker took notes, the story grew clearer, yet more troubling. Jay and Jake recounted nights spent searching for shelter, begging for scraps, and the kindness of strangers like Baker, offering brief hope for better days. Baker's pen moved quickly, capturing each important detail, names, places, and the gaps where adults should have been. With each word they spoke, the picture formed, a hard reality he knew they had to confront together. Jake spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "We got really good at finding food," he said, glancing shyly at his brother. "Sometimes people gave us things when we asked nicely." Baker nodded, absorbing the heavy reality of their survival. Their resilience was astounding, yet heartbreaking. "You boys are brave," Baker said, amazed at their spirit. Yet deep down he was determined to find the adults who had let them down. Officer Baker looked at the boys, determination in his eyes. "I promise, we'll find out what happened," he said, hoping his words brought them some comfort. Jay looked up, eyes hopeful yet uncertain. "Why did they leave us?" he whispered. Baker knelt down, meeting their gaze. "I don't know, but we'll figure it out. You're not alone anymore," he assured them, though he was still very unsure about how he was going to solve this mystery. Baker and Miller exchanged ideas for a plan as they started their patrol. "We can't leave any stone unturned," Miller stated, feeling the urgency. "Let's see if anyone knows these kids," Baker said, starting with the local neighborhood. They knew it was crucial to gather leads fast. As they walked the streets, the boys' story echoed in their minds. Both of them knew that this case was going to stick with them for a while. Stopping at a park around the corner, the officers began asking if anyone had seen the boys with any adults. "Have you noticed them before?" Baker inquired of a shopkeeper. The man scratched his head, trying to remember. His uncertainty hung in the air. Meanwhile, the boys sat in the police car, huddled together. Officer Baker wanted to take them to someplace warm and safe, but he knew he needed to check the area first. The first person able to help was a shopkeeper. "Yes, I remember them with an elderly couple," she remarked. Baker's eyes widened slightly, seeking further details. "Anything else you can recall?" Miller prompted, hopeful for more. The shopkeeper shook her head, claiming that her memory was not what it used to be. Nonetheless, this little piece of information brought Baker and Miller one step closer to solving the missing parts of the children's story. Back in their patrol car, Baker's radio crackled to life. "We've got a sighting," a voice reported. Baker felt a rush of adrenaline. "Where?" he asked, already preparing to move. The voice gave an address where the grandparents had been seen. The officers exchanged a quick look, their objective clear. Baker couldn't shake the hope that this fresh lead would unravel the mystery behind the boys' disappearance from their grandparents' lives. After dropping the boys off somewhere safe, the patrol car sped towards the new location, siren wailing. "This could be the breakthrough we need," Miller exclaimed. Baker nodded. "Every minute counts," he replied, determination etched on his face. The drive felt both endless and fleeting. Their hope was pinned on finding the grandparents, piecing together a puzzle that had left two young children vulnerable on the streets. It was a race against time, and every second mattered. Baker and Miller arrived at the bustling diner, but disappointment hit when they learned the grandparents had already left. "They were just here," a waitress told them, wiping tables. Baker sighed, noting the missed opportunity. "We'll catch them," Miller reassured, sparking a rally of hope. As they spoke with patrons, Baker realized the investigation had shifted from finding the boys' story to following their grandparents' elusive trail. Diner regulars confirmed seeing the elderly couple often. "They've been coming here for months," another patron chimed in. Baker scribbled down the details, noting appearances and behaviors. The grandparents' routine was suddenly vital information. Although time with them had slipped through their fingers, Baker realized this was invaluable. "Let's use this," he said to Miller, determined to let no clue escape their grasp. The hunt for answers was intensifying. Back in his squad car, Officer Baker reviewed his notes, focusing on the grandparents' routine. "Regular visits to town, same diner," he mused aloud. Miller nodded. "If we trace their steps, we might find them," he suggested. Baker agreed, jotting down times and places. Their systematic approach might just provide the breakthrough they desperately needed. He felt hopeful. Every detail mattered in drawing them closer to the boys' life before their plight. Officer Miller suggested they reach out to social services for any records on the couple. "It's worth checking their history," he advised. Baker agreed, recognizing this could offer insights they'd missed. "Good call," he said, grabbing his phone. Background checks might reveal why the couple had given up two young lives so suddenly. They needed to see the full picture to ensure Jay and Jake received the protection they deserved. Baker and Miller sat down, a map sprawled before them. "We need to find concrete proof," Baker explained, tapping his pen on the paper. Miller nodded in agreement. "Let's start with whatever records we can get." Together, they crafted a solid plan. "We'll retrace their steps," Miller suggested. "And talk to anyone who might know them," Baker added. Action was their best bet to uncover the truth behind Jay and Jake's absent guardians. Baker and Miller reached out to social services, but the response was frustratingly vague. "The boys had some trouble at school recently," the voice on the line informed them. "That's all we have." Baker exchanged a look with Miller, sensing the need to dig deeper. "We should visit the school, see what we can find there," Miller proposed. "It's worth a shot," Baker agreed, knowing every clue could bring them closer to helping the boys. At the boys' school, Baker pored over the records, frowning at what he found. "Look at these absences," he pointed out to Miller. "They've missed so many days." The unexplained gaps in attendance painted a worrying picture. "Something's definitely off here," Miller murmured, tapping the files. Baker glanced at the calendar dates, thinking about what might have happened during those missing school days. It was another puzzle piece they needed to solve. An insightful teacher shared her concerns about Jay and Jake. "They've become so withdrawn lately," she explained, looking distressed. "Jay used to be so bubbly, but now he hardly says a word." Her words weighed heavily on Baker's heart. "Did anything specific happen?" Miller asked. "Nothing I can pinpoint, but the change was gradual," she replied. This piece of the story painted a clearer picture of the shifts in the boys' lives. With renewed determination, Baker and Miller set their sights on the grandparents' home. "We have to visit them," Baker insisted. Miller nodded, agreeing that it was their logical next move. It's time we paid them a visit and find out what's really going on, Miller responded firmly. They realized that speaking directly to the grandparents might unravel the tangled threads of the boys' suspicious abandonment and unveil the hidden truths. Baker and Miller decided to talk to anyone who might have insights about Jay and Jake's situation. Let's start with the neighbors, Baker suggested. And maybe their teachers, too, Miller added with determination. They were resolved to leave no stone unturned in piecing together the boys' troubled past. Every interaction, every line of inquiry brought them a step closer to understanding why the children had been left fending for themselves. Their investigation took them to the local community center, a hub of potential information. Maybe someone here knows more, Baker hoped aloud as they entered. The center buzzed with activity, faces familiar to both officers. Let's talk to the volunteers, Miller suggested. Every conversation, even the smallest lead, was a potential breakthrough. Their quest was to uncover every possible link in Jay and Jake's lives back to their guardians. Inside the community center, they were introduced to Lisa, a kind-hearted volunteer. Yes, I've seen the boys with their grandmother sometimes, she recalled thoughtfully. Baker perked up at her words. Did anything seem off about those visits? He questioned. Lisa paused, thinking. Not really, but they seemed a bit detached, she replied. Her words, though limited, played into the broader narrative they were piecing together about the boys' situation. Lisa shared small but enlightening details. The boys seemed all right, just a bit off at times, she said softly, like something was weighing on them, you know? Miller nodded, noting the inconsistencies. Baker listened, noting how even the smallest worries added to the big picture. We're trying to get them the help they need, Baker explained, grateful for each piece of the puzzle. Lisa nodded, wishing the boys would find peace soon. Baker and Miller sat in their patrol car, reflecting on the insights they had gathered. It's all slowly coming together, Baker mused. Lisa's account and the school records line up, Miller added. A clearer picture of the events surrounding Jay and Jake's life began to form. With their notes and observations, they were narrowing the scope and edging closer to understanding what led to the boys being abandoned. Baker and Miller felt a sense of urgency. They'd been chasing the truth about the grandparents' strange absence. Everything pointed to those missing guardians. We're almost there, Baker said, feeling the puzzle pieces starting to fit. Miller nodded, focused on their goal. They sensed that the answer was right in their grasp, hidden somewhere in the lives of the boys' grandparents. It was a race against time to reveal the truth. Baker felt it was time for a bold move. Let's head to their last known address, he decided, determination burning in his eyes. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. Miller agreed, seeing it as the next logical step. They both knew that speaking face-to-face with the grandparents was necessary. Too many questions were left unanswered, and the boys deserved to know the truth behind their sudden abandonment. Officer Baker gently spoke to Jay and Jake. We're going to visit your grandparents, he explained. The boys exchanged a glance, fear mixed with hope in their eyes. Will they take us back? Jay asked quietly. Baker's heart ached at the uncertainty in their voices. We'll talk to them, he promised, wanting the boys to know they mattered. It might be tough, but it's important we try. As they got closer, Baker noticed the house looked well kept. It stood quietly, almost too quietly. Looks nice, but something feels off, Miller observed, noting the silence surrounding the place. Jay and Jake stayed close to Baker, eyes scanning the house with a mix of longing and anxiety. The house should have felt like home. Instead, there was an unsettling silence, almost like it was holding its breath. Baker and Miller joined the gathering neighbors. Why the visit? One asked, clearly surprised by the police presence. Another neighbor chimed in, the couple's been quiet, nothing out of the ordinary. The officers exchanged looks, puzzled by the apparent normalcy. No loud noises or fights? Miller probed. The neighbors all shook their heads. Despite their reassurances, something wasn't right, and Baker knew they had to press on. Baker turned to Miller after speaking with the neighbors. We have to talk to them ourselves, he said firmly. They moved towards the front door, determined. The grandparents' denial loomed in Baker's thoughts, but he knew confronting them was crucial. We need answers, Miller agreed. Together, they were about to take steps into the unknown, each driven by the boys' need for a safe and loving home. Baker knocked on the door, his patience wearing thin with every passing second. Finally, he heard footsteps approaching. The grandmother opened the door, surprise flashing across her face. Who are you? She asked skeptically. "We need to talk about Jay and Jake," Baker stated gently but firmly. The air was thick with tension, and the grandmother's gaze held an edge of something indefinable as she stood there. Without missing a beat, the grandmother shook her head. "I don't know who you're talking about," she denied flatly, her words slicing through the air. Baker raised an eyebrow, unfazed by her tone. "They're your grandsons," he insisted, determination etched on his face. There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Defiance? Fear? But she held her ground, denying any connection to the boys who needed her. Baker wasn't backing down. "We have information proving otherwise," he pressed, recalling every piece of evidence spoken by Jay and Jake. Her jaw tightened, yet she remained silent. "They've been on their own, and we want to know why," Miller added, standing firm beside Baker. The boys lingered behind, unaware of the deeper layers about to unfold in a confrontation filled with tension and hidden truths. Baker's frustration deepened as the grandmother refused to budge. Why all the mystery? He wondered aloud, troubled by the lack of answers. The grandmother's persistent denial left him puzzled. She seemed completely disconnected, her actions deepening the mystery surrounding the boys' journey. As Baker and Miller exchanged worried glances, they realized they'd hit a wall. The truth was tangled up in secrets waiting to be untangled. Baker leaned against the patrol car, thoughts racing. The grandmother's stubborn denial still buzzed in his head, urging him to dig deeper. "We can't just let this go," Baker said to Miller, determination clear in his eyes. Miller nodded, equally resolved. "We need more than her word," he replied. They both understood that with time against them, every minute mattered. They needed real proof that tied everything together. Returning to the station, Baker dove into a pile of records, hoping to uncover something more. The atmosphere was tense with urgency. "These dates don't match her story," he murmured, scratching his head in frustration. Miller, beside him, caught a glimpse of the inconsistency. "She's hiding something for sure," he replied. They both agreed that the records painted a messy picture, but the truth was still somewhere in there. Feeling stuck, Baker reached out to Detective Cooper, hoping for some fresh eyes. "We need your magic touch on this," Baker said, laying out the details. Cooper listened intently, nodding. "Sometimes it just takes a different angle," he remarked coolly. Baker felt a bit of relief. Cooper's involvement might crack open the case. "Let's get to work," Cooper said, rolling up his sleeves with a confident smirk. With Cooper diving into the documents, the mood shifted. He scrutinized each paper like a hawk, murmuring, "Interesting." Baker leaned in, curious. "What'd you find?" he asked eagerly. Cooper explained, "Their finances show a double life. They've got resources they're not admitting to." Baker's eyes widened, realizing they were peeling back layers of deception. The grandparents were keeping secrets, and now they were one step closer to uncovering them. Pondering over Cooper's findings, Baker felt the case take a more complicated turn. Why ditch the kids when they've got all this? He wondered, baffled by the heartlessness. Miller caught his drift. "We cracked that, we solve everything," he declared firmly. Baker nodded, realizing that understanding their motives was the missing piece. They needed to uncover what went so wrong in that household for the boys to be abandoned like that. Gathering the documents again, Baker and Miller compiled everything they had. "We have to confront them again," Miller stated. Baker agreed, determination fueling him. "This time, there's no denying it," Baker assured, holding up the evidence. They prepared to go back, ready to lay it all out on the table, hoping to break through the wall the grandparents had built. It was all about bringing the truth to light. To bolster their case further, Baker and Miller collected more proof. "We need everything, the whole picture," Baker insisted as they gathered school reports, testimonies from neighbors, and even community records. "All this paints a big picture," Miller added, feeling the pieces clicking into place. Together, they prepared for the showdown with the grandparents, their buildup of evidence making them more confident of confronting the truth. Armed with their growing arsenal of paperwork and reports, Baker and Cooper readied themselves for their next encounter with the grandparents. "They won't see this coming," Baker said, a determined spark in his eyes. Cooper nodded knowingly. "We're ready for whatever they throw our way," he replied. They knew they might face resistance, but they were determined to uncover what events led to Jay and Jake being left so vulnerable. Meanwhile, with the case heating up, the boys were kept safe with Mrs. Thompson, a trusted family friend. "You'll be okay here," Baker assured Jay and Jake, watching them get cozy on the couch. They nodded, trying their best to feel reassured. "We'll be back soon," Baker promised, glancing at Mrs. Thompson. The drive to keep them safe was fueling his resolve. The boys needed stability, and Baker was determined to provide it. As Baker and Cooper neared the grandparents' residence again, their resolve was stronger than before. "We've got this," Cooper said, glancing sideways at Baker. The case file, now hefty in the back seat, held the keys to their confidence. "We're gonna get some answers this time," Baker confirmed, pulling up to the curb. They steeled themselves for this pivotal moment, ready to face whatever awaited on the other side of that door. Baker and Cooper stood in front of the grandparents' house again, a sense of urgency buzzing around them. The property looked old and quiet, holding its secrets close. "We need answers," Cooper said, eyeing the building. "Yeah, and we're not leaving without them today," Baker replied firmly. They knew the place didn't give away much, but hoped that something inside would finally help them piece together the boys' puzzling past. As Baker and Cooper knocked, footsteps echoed inside. The door opened, revealing the grandfather's face. "Come in," he said unexpectedly, waving them inside like they were old friends. Baker raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sudden change in attitude. Cooper shrugged and followed, the two officers stepping into the unknown once more. The air inside was tense, but this invitation was a chance they couldn't pass up. Inside, the grandparents looked uneasy, but resigned to talk. "Guess we should explain," the grandfather muttered. The grandmother nodded, her eyes avoiding the visitors. Baker was cautious, knowing their position could shift the story's gears. "Right, so let's chat," Cooper encouraged, hoping to inspire openness. The grandparents exchanged a glance, like they were mentally rallying themselves. It was the first step toward unraveling the mystery behind it all. Baker laid out the paperwork they'd brought, every piece telling a story of guardianship and care. "We just need to understand your side," he said calmly. The grandmother sighed, tracing her fingers over the papers scattered before her. "It's been tough," she started, her voice low. Baker kept a steady tone, not rushing the moment. Each word spoken was a brick in the wall of truth slowly being dismantled. Faced with the truth, the grandmother finally spoke, her words heavy with emotion. "We didn't want them on the streets," she confessed, eyes glistening. "But it got so hard. We couldn't keep up." The weight of their struggle was evident. Baker listened deeply, the sense of how complex this all was sinking in. It wasn't simple neglect. There was a story here, one of hardship and difficult choices made along the way. The grandmother's admission caught Baker off guard, a complex web of issues unraveling before him. His image of negligent grandparents flipped to one of a family in crisis. The struggles they faced painted a picture rich with unexpected layers. "I didn't expect that," he murmured, rethinking his approach. The truth revealed a depth he hadn't seen before, shifting his understanding and reigniting his compassion for both the grandparents and the children. Their story continued to unfold, bearing the harsh realities of aging and failing health, all tangled with the challenge of raising young kids. "It just got away from us," the grandfather explained, his voice weary. "We tried our best." Each word drew Baker into their world, a place where love and obligation battled against overwhelming odds. He absorbed their experiences, every detail painting a poignant picture of their painful fight. Compassion slipped into Baker's voice as he replied, "It sounds like you've been through a lot." He weighed their story carefully, recognizing their trials, but knowing Jay and Jake's safety had to come first. The grandparents needed help, but the boys needed it even more. Baker understood that acknowledging their challenges was essential, ensuring they worked together to find a safe and supportive place for Jay and Jake. Baker couldn't help but ask, "Why didn't you reach out for help?" It was clear the grandparents had struggled on their own when services could have stepped in. The grandmother looked away, the question striking a chord. "Pride, I guess," she admitted, a mixture of shame and regret in her tone. "We didn't want anyone to think we failed them." Baker nodded, understanding her struggle, yet knowing the conversation was necessary. The truth finally out, they admitted their pride had kept them silent. "We were ashamed," the grandfather added, his voice raw with emotion, "to show we couldn't do it." The words hung in the air, a confession of vulnerability that explained so much. Baker nodded, seeing the human side of their predicament. He recognized their hardships, determined to bring together the support needed for Jay and Jake's future. Officer Baker knelt down, making eye contact with Jay and Jake. "Listen, guys, you've got every right to feel safe and loved, okay?" he said, his voice gentle but firm. The boys nodded, a little more at ease. "We're gonna make sure you get that," Baker added, smiling softly to encourage them. He wanted the boys to believe in a better future, knowing they deserved a stable environment above all else. With the truth out in the open, Baker moved swiftly. "We've got a plan in place to help you both," he assured the boys, dialing numbers and making calls. It was time to get them somewhere they could feel secure. "Hang tight, it won't be long," he said, giving them a reassuring pat as he coordinated with others to transition Jay and Jake into care that could offer true safety and support. After some digging, Baker and Cooper tracked down the boys' aunt. She was thrilled to know they were safe. "I'd been worried sick," she exclaimed when hearing the news. She didn't hesitate at all, eager to welcome Jay and Jake into her home. Baker felt a wave of relief. This was a big step towards giving the boys the family warmth and stability they desperately needed. Hope was finally on the horizon. Support services didn't waste time, setting up meetings and assessments to put plans into motion. "We want to see Jay and Jake settled in their new home as soon as possible," a caseworker explained to Baker. The boys were taken care of every step of the way. Baker and Cooper felt a burden start to lift. The boys were finally getting the kind of attention and love they deserved thanks to everyone banding together. Jay and Jake's aunt met with Baker and Cooper, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you both so much," she said, emotion choking her voice. Her thanks weren't just polite words, they were heartfelt and sincere. The officers had gone above and beyond, showing real dedication. Knowing the family appreciated their work was comforting. It meant the boys were headed into a nurturing environment, which was the greatest reward for Baker. With Jay and Jake now in the care of their aunt, Baker and Cooper sat down with the boys. "You've got a great place with your aunt, and she's excited to have you," Baker explained. The boys listened, eyes wide with hope. "It's a fresh start, and you'll have lots of support," Cooper added. The officers wanted them to feel secure and loved, making sure they understood they weren't alone anymore. Seeing Jay and Jake safely placed with family, Baker felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. It was a mix of relief and joy. "We finally did it," Baker said to Cooper, pride in his voice. Knowing the boys were in a safe home made the hard work pay off. As they walked back to their patrol car, he couldn't help but feel satisfied. The case had ended how they hoped, and it felt good. Word of the officers' dedication spread quickly, and the community rallied alongside. Neighbors and local groups offered anything the boys might need. "If there's anything we can do, just let us know," they said. The support was abundant, acknowledging the officers' efforts. Baker and Cooper were reminded how powerful community could be, solidifying their belief in working together. It was heartening to see everyone stepping up to ensure Jay and Jake's safety and happiness. Settled in with their aunt, Jay and Jake began to blossom. Their laughter often filled the home, a sign of the healing power of love and care. "They've been through so much, but they're doing really well now," their aunt shared with Baker during a visit. Seeing the boys transition felt like a triumph against the odds. The journey had been tough, yet watching them thrive was the ultimate testament to their resilience. One day, Officer Baker received a simple card from Jay. Inside was a heartfelt message. "Thanks for bringing the light back to our lives." Baker read it, feeling a surge of emotion. The card didn't just thank him, it reassured him about the path he'd chosen. It was little things like this that made everything worthwhile. With a smile, he tucked the card away, inspired anew to keep making a difference.